The red dust of Tartarus 7 coated everything, the equipment, the buildings, the lungs of those unfortunate enough to breathe its toxic air for too long. For Mira, a Cerulean with iridescent blue skin now dulled by months of mining work, that dust had become her entire world. She collapsed against the rough stone wall of the mining tunnel, her slender fingers bleeding from another 14-hour shift extracting luxite crystals from the planet's unforgiving bedrock. Her species was known for their dexterity and fine motor control, traits that made them valuable to the Obsidian Mining Corporation. Too valuable to kill, but not valuable enough to treat as anything more than tools. Get moving, blue skin. The harsh voice of Overseer Drax cut through the stale air. The Vrenian's 4 eyes narrowed as he raised his neural whip. Production quotas are up another 10%, by order of the director. Myra's luminescent eyes, once bright as twin moons, flickered with fading defiance. I need water. Just water. Her melodic voice, characteristic of her species, had grown raspy from the dust. The Overseer's response was a casual flick of his neural whip, sending Mira sprawling to the ground, her nerves screaming in agony. The other miners, a collection of unfortunate souls from a dozen different systems, kept their heads down. No one helped. No one could afford to. Next time I'll up the setting, Drax snarled. Now move. 3 tunnels away, Thorn Riker stepped out of his ship, the Star Wanderer, a modified Terran light freighter that had seen better days. His tall frame and the way he carried himself marked him instantly as human, even before anyone noticed his tanned skin and sharp green eyes. Humans weren't uncommon in the galaxy, but they were rare on backwater mining colonies like this one. Thorn adjusted his worn leather jacket and the blaster holstered at his hip, not threateningly, but visibly enough. In places like this, appearing defenseless was an invitation to trouble. Captain Riker. A thin, reptilian figure in expensive synthetics approached. I'm Administrator Kex. Your timing is impeccable. We have the shipment of medical supplies ready for inspection. Thorn nodded curtly. Medical supplies. That's what they called it in the manifests. In reality, he was delivering specialized pharmaceuticals that kept the miners working beyond normal endurance, technically legal, devastatingly effective. Let's make this quick, Thorn said, his voice carrying the distinctive Terran accent that many species found strangely melodic. I've got 3 other stops before the week's out. Kex led him through the facility's main complex, a utilitarian maze of prefabricated structures designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Thorn had visited dozens of mining operations across the outer rim, but something about this place set his nerves on edge. The guards were too numerous, too heavily armed for a standard operation. As they passed through the central yard, a commotion erupted near the processing plant. A group of guards dragged a blue-skinned female toward a public punishment post. Her iridescent skin was marred with bruises and the fine patterns of neural whip strikes. Just a disciplinary issue, Keck said dismissively. One of our Cerulean assets has been underperforming. Thorn's jaw tightened. Assets? Contractual laborers, Kex amended smoothly. This one was sold to us for a single credit by Kargan slavers. Hardly worth the trouble, but her kind have the fine motor skills needed for luxury crystal extraction. The guards chained the Cerulean to the post. Her eyes, luminous despite her weakened state, scanned the yard until they locked with Thorn's. Something passed between them, a fleeting connection, a silent recognition. Let's continue, Kex urged, but Thorn remained rooted. What's her crime? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Requesting water during shift, Kex replied. Disrupting production. The director has mandated examples be made. As the first lash of the neural whip cracked across the Cerulean's back, her cry pierced Thorn to his core. In that moment, memories of his own past, ones he'd spent years drowning in smuggled Arcturian whiskey, surged forward. The mines of Europa. The taste of ice and blood. The day he'd sworn no one would ever own him again. Stop, Thorn said, his hand moving to his blaster. Excuse me? Kexa's forked tongue flicked nervously. I said stop. Thorn stepped forward, his voice carrying across the yard. I want to buy her contract. The guard with the whip paused, looking to Kex for direction. The administrator's scales flushed a deeper green. That's not possible. The director. Everything has a price, Thorn interrupted. Name it. As he stood there in the toxic red dust of Tartarus 7, Thorn Riker, smuggler, rogue, survivor, made a decision that would alter the course of lives across the sector. And in the luminescent eyes of a broken Cyrillian slave, the first dangerous flicker of hope began to burn. 100,000 credits, Administrator Kex finally said, his reptilian features settling into a smug expression. He clearly expected the absurd price to end Thorn's sudden humanitarian impulse. Thorn didn't flinch. 20,000. That's more than you'd make from her labor in 5 years, and we both know she won't survive that long in these conditions. The crowd of miners and guards had grown silent, watching the exchange with a mixture of fear and fascination. Public defiance was unheard of at Obsidian Mining. You misunderstand, Captain Riker. Director Voss's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from the administrative building. A massive Cronian with steel-gray skin and cybernetic enhancements that hummed with quiet menace, Voss was the reason this mining operation remained untouched by galactic regulation forces. This isn't about credits. It's about precedent. Thorn sized up the director, recognizing the type immediately. Ex-military, probably dishonorably discharged, the kind who found his true calling in places beyond the reach of law. Every slave, contractual laborer, who sees someone by their way out gets dangerous ideas, Voss continued, approaching Mira where she remained chained to the post. He ran a metallic finger along her cheek, leaving a thin line of blue blood. Hope is a contagion I can't afford in my operation. Mira didn't flinch, her luminescent eyes fixed on Thorn with an intensity that seemed to communicate more than words could. Not begging, but something else, recognition, perhaps. Of a kindred spirit. Of someone who understood captivity. Thorn had survived the underworld of 100 worlds by knowing when to walk away. This wasn't one of those times. Then perhaps we should discuss a different arrangement. Thorn's hand moved casually toward his jacket, seemingly adjusting it. I've got a shipment of grade A stims that the hegemony military would pay handsomely for. Off manifest, of course. Voss's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused. And I need someone with Cyrillian dexterity to help repackage them. Short-term contract, just a few months. I'll return her when the job's done. Thorn lied smoothly, maintaining eye contact with Voss. The director studied him for a long moment. You're offering to rent her? At a premium. 30,000 credits for 6 months of specialized labor. After that, she's all yours again. Thorn forced himself to maintain his casual demeanor, though the words tasted like acid. A slow, predatory smile spread across Voss's face. 40,000, and you take full liability for any damage. Done. Thorn extended his hand to seal the deal, the old-fashioned human way. As Voss reached to shake it, Thorn activated the concealed neural disruptor in his palm. The crackling blue energy enveloped Voss, sending him convulsing to the ground, his cybernetics sparking and shorting out. The yard erupted into chaos. Thorn drew his blaster in one fluid motion, firing rapidly at the closest guards while sprinting toward Mira. The shots weren't lethal, aimed at shoulders and legs, but they were devastatingly effective. Stay down, he shouted to the assembled miners as he reached Mira and fired at her restraints. The energy beam sliced through the metal, and she collapsed forward into his arms. Can you run? He asked urgently. Her blue lips parted, voice barely audible. Yes. Kex was shouting into his communicator, summoning security reinforcements. Alarms blared across the facility, echoing against the rock walls of the nearby mine shafts. "We need a distraction," Thorn muttered, supporting Myra's weight as they moved toward the edge of the yard. The Star Wanderer was 300 meters away, across open ground. "The processing plant," Mira gasped, pointing with a trembling finger. "Luxite is volatile when superheated." Understanding sparked in Thorn's eyes. He adjusted his blaster settings to maximum output and fired 3 precise shots at the machinery visible through the plant's windows. The result was instantaneous, a series of blue-white explosions that sent workers and guards scrambling for cover. "Now!" Thorn half-carried, half-dragged Mira toward his ship as secondary explosions continued to rock the facility. Behind them, something unexpected was happening. Other miners were fighting back, seizing the moment of chaos to turn on their overseers. Reaching the Star Wanderer's ramp, Thorn slapped the entry control and hustled Mira inside. The ship's interior was a stark contrast to the harsh mining colony, clean, ordered, with the subtle hum of well-maintained tech. "Strap in," he ordered, depositing her in the co-pilot's seat and launching himself into the pilot's position. His fingers flew across the controls, bypassing safety protocols to initiate an emergency takeoff sequence. Through the viewport, they could see armed guards pouring out of the barracks, taking up positions around the landing pad. Energy weapons began firing, their shots dissipating harmlessly against the Star Wanderer's shields. "Hope you're not too attached to the atmosphere on this rock," Thorn muttered, engaging the main thrusters. The blast from the engine scattered the approaching guards and scorched the landing pad black. The ship lurched upward, breaking free of Tartarus VII's gravity well with a violence that pressed them both back into their seats. Myra's breath came in ragged gasps, her eyes wide with disbelief at her sudden freedom. As the red planet shrank behind them, proximity alarms screamed. 2 security interceptors had launched in pursuit. "They're persistent, I'll give them that," Thorn said, his voice tight with concentration as he initiated a series of evasive maneuvers. "Can you reach that blue panel?" "Third switch from the left." Mira stretched out her trembling hand, flipping the switch. Immediately, a cloud of sensor-jamming particles deployed behind them, momentarily blinding their pursuers. Thorn punched in coordinates for a jump to hyperspace, not to their actual destination, but to a waypoint where they could reorient without being tracked. "Why?" Myra's melodic voice was faint but clear. "Why risk everything for me?" Thorn's gaze remained fixed on the controls, but his jaw tightened. "Let's just say I know what those chains feel like." As the stars stretched into streaks of light and the Star Wanderer leapt into hyperspace, Mira leaned her head back against the seat, her iridescent skin catching the blue glow of the instrumentation. For the first time in nearly a year, she was beyond the reach of her captors. But as the adrenaline of escape began to fade, the reality of her situation settled in. She was free, but free to what? And could she trust this human, this stranger who had just upended his life and endangered himself for someone he didn't even know? The hyperspace corridor enveloped them in its protective cocoon, carrying them toward an uncertain future as behind them, on Tartarus 7, the first sparks of revolution had been ignited. The Star Wanderer drifted in the shadow of a nameless asteroid belt, its systems powered down to minimal output to avoid detection. 3 hyperspace jumps had brought them to this forgotten corner of the Calypso sector, far from established trade routes and patrol vectors. In the ship's small medical bay, Mira lay face down on a treatment table as Thorn carefully applied regenerative gel to the neural whip wounds on her back. The lacerations crisscrossed her iridescent blue skin like a brutal cartography of her suffering. "This might sting," Thorn warned, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as they worked. Mira didn't flinch, though her luminescent eyes flickered with pain. "Compared to the mines, this is nothing." Her voice, gaining strength hour by hour, carried the musical cadence characteristic of ceruleans, a haunting, almost hypnotic quality that seemed to resonate in the small chamber. "How long were you there?" Thorn asked, focusing on a particularly deep wound near her shoulder blade. 342 days. The precision of her answer spoke volumes. Before that, 2 months on a Kargan slave transport. Before that. She trailed off, the memories visibly painful. You don't have to talk about it. And you? Mira asked instead. You said you knew what the chains felt like. Thorn's hands paused momentarily. Europa. Jupiter's moon. The ice mines. 6 years, starting when I was 14. His words were clipped, mechanical, as if reading from a file. Different planet, same story. How did you escape? A shadow passed across Thorn's face. There was a riot. Guards got sloppy. I got lucky. He applied the last of the gel and activated the metacomp, which hummed as it accelerated the healing process. Most weren't so fortunate. Mira shifted slightly, turning to face him. Up close, the fine patterns on her skin, natural bioluminescent markings that spiraled across her features, were mesmerizing, despite being dulled by months of malnutrition and toxic exposure. And now you're a smuggler. Cargo transporter, he corrected with a hint of a smile. Sometimes the cargo isn't strictly registered. And sometimes you impulsively rescue slaves and make powerful enemies. There was no judgment in her tone, only curiosity. Thorn stepped back, securing the metacomp. You should rest. The regenerative treatment works better during sleep cycles. But Mira reached out, catching his wrist with surprising strength. Her touch sent an unexpected warmth through his arm. Thank you, she said simply, her eyes holding his. I had forgotten what hope felt like. Something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of shared trauma, of understanding that ran deeper than words. Thorn gently disengaged her hand, uncomfortable with the intensity of the moment. We're not safe yet, he cautioned. Obsidian mining has connections across 3 sectors. And we both know Voss isn't the type to forgive and forget. Where will we go? Thorn hesitated at the doorway. I have a contact on Helio Station. Someone who might help us disappear for a while. He didn't mention that reaching Helios meant navigating the heavily patrolled Nexus corridor, or that his contact was a former lover whose last words to him had included several creative death threats. After Mira drifted into an exhausted sleep, Thorn made his way to the cockpit, staring out at the distant stars. The ship's systems beeped softly, monitoring the surrounding space for any signs of pursuit. He poured himself a measure of Arcturian whiskey from a battered flask, his ritual after every close call. His secure comm unit chimed, displaying an encrypted message from an old associate. He hesitated before opening it, knowing it could only be bad news. The holographic text confirmed his fears. Obsidian mining had placed a substantial bounty on both his head and the stolen Cerulean asset. Every mercenary and bounty hunter in the sector would be looking for them. Damn it, he muttered, downing the whiskey in one burning gulp. He should drop her at the next neutral port. Give her enough credits to disappear. It would be the sensible thing to do. He'd survived this long by knowing when to cut his losses. But as the artificial night cycle dimmed the lights throughout the ship, Thorn found himself checking the metacomp's remote readout, ensuring Myra's vital signs remained stable. The steady rhythm of her heartbeat displayed on the small screen seemed to synchronize with his own. Days passed in the relative safety of their asteroid hiding place. Mira regained strength rapidly, her species' natural resilience asserting itself once freed from the toxic environment of the mines. Thorn found her one morning in the ship's compact galley, preparing a surprisingly complex meal from his limited stores. Ceruleans are sensitive to the chemical composition of food, she explained, noticing his surprise. We can taste elements others can't detect. It makes us good cooks, among other things. They ate together in a comfortable silence that had developed between them, a quiet understanding that neither needed to fill with unnecessary words. Your wounds are healing well, Thorn observed as Mira moved with increasing fluidity. The angry marks on her back had faded to silvery traces that caught the light like the rest of her skin. My body heals faster than other parts, she replied softly. That evening, as Thorn ran system diagnostics in preparation for their departure to Helio Station, Mira joined him in the cockpit. She had adapted one of his spare flight suits, modifying it to accommodate her slightly different physiology. The effect was striking, no longer a broken slave, but a formidable woman with an otherworldly beauty. "Teach me," she said, gesturing to the controls. Thorn raised an eyebrow. "To fly?" "To survive," she clarified. "If we're separated. If something happens to you." The practicality of her request resonated with Thorn. He nodded and began explaining the ship's basic functions, surprised by how quickly she absorbed the information. Her fingers, more elongated and dexterous than human hands, moved across the controls with natural precision. As the lesson progressed, their proximity in the confined space of the cockpit created a tangible tension. Twice, their hands brushed, and each time, that same unexpected warmth flowed between them. Thorn found himself distracted by the subtle, sweet scent that emanated from her skin, a pheromone response, he guessed, unique to her species. "What is it like," Mira asked suddenly, "to be human? To come from a world where your people are known for their defiance?" Thorn considered the question. "Humans aren't special. We just tend to push back when pushed. The guards at the mine feared humans more than other species. They said humans couldn't be broken, only killed." She tilted her head, studying him. "Is that true?" "No. Everyone can be broken." His voice dropped, memories darkening his expression. "But some of us are stubborn enough to put ourselves back together afterward." Without warning, Mira leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, hesitantly, experimentally. The contact sent a shock through Thorn's system, a jolt of connection that went beyond the physical. Her lips were cooler than a human's, but the sensation was electric. He pulled back, startled. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I misunderstood." "No," Thorn interrupted, his voice rough. "It's not that. It's just." He struggled to articulate the complexity of the situation. "You've been through trauma. You're vulnerable. I don't want to take advantage." Myra's luminescent eyes flashed with a sudden fire. "Don't mistake gratitude for attraction, human. And don't presume to protect me from my own choices." Her musical voice carried a new edge. "I've had everything taken from me. My freedom. My dignity. My home. The one thing they couldn't take was my agency. Don't you dare try." The fierceness of her response caught Thorn off guard, and awakened something in him. This wasn't the broken slave he'd rescued, this was a survivor, as tempered by adversity as he was. This time, when their lips met, neither pulled away. The kiss deepened, carrying the weight of shared understanding, of mutual recognition. Her hands, with their graceful blue fingers, traced the old scars visible at his collar, the marks of his own captivity. His arms encircled her carefully, mindful of her healing wounds. When they finally separated, something fundamental had shifted between them. No longer rescuer and rescued, but equals united by a common past and an uncertain future. The ship's proximity alarm shattered the moment, blaring suddenly through the cabin. Thorn's focus snapped to the scanner display, where 3 ships had appeared at the edge of the asteroid field. "Bounty hunters," he said grimly, recognizing the configuration of the approaching vessels. "They've found us." Myra's expression hardened with resolve. "Then let's show them what happens when they hunt a human and a Cerulean who have nothing left to lose." As they prepared for yet another desperate escape, the connection between them hummed like a tangible force, forged in shared suffering, strengthened by defiance, and now complicated by an attraction neither had expected to find in the cold emptiness of space. Helio Station hung in the void like a tarnished jewel, its kilometers-long structure rotating slowly against the backdrop of a binary star system. Once a prestigious Galactic Alliance outpost, it had devolved into a haven for those seeking to avoid official scrutiny, smugglers, mercenaries, political exiles, and anyone with enough credits to buy anonymity. The Star Wanderer docked in a lower hangar, its hull still bearing scorch marks from their recent encounter with bounty hunters. That skirmish had ended with one pursuit ship disabled and the other two thrown off their trail by a daring maneuver through an unstable wormhole, a risk that had nearly cost them their lives. "Stay close," Thorn murmured as they exited the ship. "Helios has no formal authority, but it has plenty of eyes looking for profit." Mira nodded, her hood pulled low over her distinctive features. The regenerative treatments had restored much of her natural luminescence, making her cerulean heritage impossible to disguise completely. She walked beside Thorn with newfound confidence, one hand resting casually on the small blaster he'd given her. The station's promenade was a cacophony of species, commerce, and intrigue. Merchants hawked goods from 100 worlds, information brokers whispered secrets for the right price, and the air was thick with exotic spices and machine oil. Thorn navigated the chaos with practiced ease, leading Mira through side passages and maintenance corridors until they reached a nondescript door in a quieter section. He hesitated before knocking, turning to Mira. "Valencia can be difficult. Let me do the talking." The door slid open to reveal a statuesque woman with olive skin, augmented eyes that glowed amber, and an expression that darkened the moment she recognized Thorn. "You've got some nerve showing up here, Riker," she said, her hand moving to the pistol at her hip. "Good to see you too, Val," Thorn replied with forced lightness. "Mind if we come in before someone puts another bounty on my head?" Valencia's augmented gaze shifted to Mira, scanning her with technological precision. "A Cerulean. Rare. And this one's been through hell recently." Her eyes narrowed. "What have you gotten yourself into this time?" Once inside Valencia's quarters, a surprisingly opulent space filled with artifacts from across the galaxy, the full story emerged. Thorn explained their escape from Tartarus 7, while Valencia's network of informants filled in the aftermath. The mining facility in chaos, several hundred slaves escaped during the confusion, and Director Voss hospitalized but alive and furious. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," Valencia concluded, pouring a luminous blue liquid into 3 glasses. "Obsidian mining is backed by the hegemony's military-industrial complex. This isn't some small-time operation you've crossed." "I didn't exactly plan it," Thorn said, accepting the drink. Valencia's laugh was sharp. "You never do. That's why we didn't work out." She turned to Mira with a more genuine smile. "He's always been a sucker for lost causes." "I'm not a lost cause," Mira replied evenly. "I'm a survivor." Something like respect flickered in Valencia's expression. "Fair enough." She raised her glass. "To survivors, then." As they drank, Valencia activated a holographic display dominating one wall. "You should see this. It's been circulating on restricted channels for the past 2 days." The display showed footage from Tartarus 7, not of their escape, but its aftermath. Miners overwhelming guards, seizing control of sections of the facility. Elsewhere on the planet, similar uprisings had begun at other obsidian mining operations. The spark Thorn and Mira had ignited had grown into a flame. "They're calling it the Tartarus Rebellion," Valencia said. "First major slave revolt in the Outer Rim in decades. The hegemony is bringing in troops to restore order." Mira watched the footage with wide eyes, her hand unconsciously finding Thorn's. "They'll be massacred." "Maybe not," Valencia replied, manipulating the display to show a different feed. "Some independent operators are running blockades, smuggling weapons to the rebels. And there are rumors that elements within the Galactic Alliance are secretly providing support." Thorn leaned forward, studying the tactical displays. "It's not enough. They need coordination, leadership." His jaw tightened. "They need someone who knows Obsidian's operations from the inside." The realization of what he was suggesting settled over the room. You're not seriously considering going back, Valencia said incredulously. But Mira was already nodding. We have to. I memorized the facility layouts, security protocols, guard rotations. I had to survive. Her luminescent eyes burned with purpose. There are still thousands enslaved there. People who helped me stay alive when I first arrived. Valencia looked between them, recognition dawning. You two are involved now, aren't you? She shook her head. Bleeding hearts deserve each other, I suppose. Over the next days, Mira and Thorn scarcely left Valencia's quarters, immersing themselves in planning. Valencia, despite her initial skepticism, proved an invaluable ally. Her connections extended to former Alliance military personnel now working as private contractors, and several owed her favors. I can give you a team, she said on the third day, bringing up profiles of 6 experienced operatives. Not enough for a frontal assault, but enough for a surgical strike if your intel is good. Thorn studied the profiles while Mira sketched detailed maps of the Tartarus 7 facilities from memory, her long blue fingers moving with extraordinary precision across the holographic interface. The main weakness is here, she explained, indicating a secondary processing plant. The primary power relays for the security systems run through a maintenance tunnel that's minimally guarded. They never expected an attack from within. By night, planning gave way to more intimate moments. In the privacy of a small guest chamber, Thorn and Mira explored their growing connection. The differences in their physiology created a fascinating dance of discovery. Her skin against his generated a subtle harmonic resonance, a cerulean biological response that heightened sensation for both of them. His warmth, humans ran hotter than her species, seemed to awaken something primal in her. Their lovemaking transcended the physical, carrying the weight of their shared traumas and newfound hope. Afterward, lying together in the darkness, Mira traced the network of scars across Thorn's back, legacies of his time in the Europa ice mines. We might not survive this, she whispered. Thorn pulled her closer. Probably not. But we'll give them hell first. Is that the human way? There was a smile in her voice. It's our way now. The morning they were scheduled to depart, Valencia presented Mira with a gift, a customized combat suit designed for cerulean physiology, with adaptive camouflage capabilities that worked in harmony with her natural bioluminescence. It's been in my collection for years, Valencia explained. Waiting for the right owner. As Mira tried it on, marveling at the perfect fit, Valencia pulled Thorn aside. You realize you're in love with her, she said bluntly. It wasn't a question. Thorn didn't deny it. Complicated timing. It always is with you. Valencia's augmented eyes studied him with uncomfortable perception. Just don't get yourself killed before you tell her. The Star Wanderer, rechristened with a new transponder identity courtesy of Valencia's technicians, departed Helio Station with a crew of 8, Thorn, Mira, and 6 hardened veterans of various conflicts across the galaxy. Their ship's cargo hold was filled with advanced weapons, tactical gear, and communication devices to coordinate with the rebel forces on Tartarus 7. As they prepared for the jump to hyperspace, Mira took her place at the co-pilot station. Her movements were confident now, her understanding of the ship's systems comprehensive. The transformation from the broken slave Thorn had first encountered to this formidable woman was extraordinary. Last chance to back out, he said quietly, cognizant of the gravity of what they were attempting. Myra's hand closed over his on the hyperspace initiator. Freedom has a price, she replied. We're just the ones who happen to be called to pay it. Together, they activated the jump sequence. As the stars stretched into streaks of light, Thorn realized that whatever happened next, his life had been irreversibly changed the moment he saw Mira chained to that post. Some choices rewrote destinies. Some connections transcended logic. The Star Wanderer vanished into hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes of thousands of enslaved souls, and 2 people who had found, against all odds, that the universe's cruelty could be answered with something other than despair. Behind them, the binary stars of the Helio system cast their light into the void, illuminating the path they had chosen, a path that led back to the world of their nightmares, but forward into a future worth fighting for. The toxic red dust of Tartarus 7 swirled around them as night fell. Thorn, Mira, and their team of 6 mercenaries crouched in the shadow of a massive ore processor, the facility's floodlights creating pools of harsh illumination that they carefully avoided. 2 standard weeks had passed since they'd left Helio Station. 2 weeks of careful reconnaissance, of establishing contact with the rebel slaves who had managed to seize control of the outlying mining camps. 2 weeks of watching hegemony troops establish a blockade around the primary facility where Director Voss had consolidated his forces. "Security's tighter than you remembered," whispered Coda, a former Alliance Special Forces operative whose dark skin was now camouflaged with tactical paint. "They've doubled the sensor grid coverage." Mira nodded, her own blue skin barely visible beneath the combat suit Valencia had given her. "They're adapting. But so are we." The rebellion had grown beyond anything they could have anticipated. Nearly 40% of the planet's mining operations had been overrun by the slaves, but the main complex, where the most valuable luxite deposits were processed, remained firmly under Obsidian mining control. More critically, it was where the communication array that could call in hegemony reinforcements was located. "We need to move," Thorn said, checking the chronometer on his wrist. "We have a 20-second window when the patrol patterns overlap." They moved as one, a synchronized unit flowing across the open ground between the processor and the main facility's perimeter. Mira led the way, her cerulean night vision guiding them through blind spots in the security system she had memorized during her captivity. At the maintenance access point, a nondescript panel hidden beneath accumulations of industrial waste, Mira's dexterous fingers worked with practiced precision. The panel slid open, revealing a narrow tunnel bathed in red emergency lighting. 14 minutes until the next automated system check, she reminded them as they slipped inside. The tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare, barely wide enough for the humans in the group. Pipes carrying superheated steam ran along the ceiling, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of industrial chemicals. For Mira, it carried echoes of her enslavement. For Thorn, uncomfortable memories of Europa's ice tunnels. Their objective was threefold: disable the communication array to prevent reinforcements, free the remaining slaves, and capture or eliminate Director Voss, whose cybernetic enhancements made him a formidable opponent. When they reached the central junction, the team split into 3 pairs. Coda and 2 others headed for the communication center, a second team moved toward the slave barracks, while Thorn and Mira made their way to the administrative section where Voss would be located. "You're sure about this?" Thorn asked as they paused at a security door. Mira's eyes glowed faintly in the dimness. "I spent 342 days dreaming of this moment." "Yes, I'm sure." They bypassed the door using access codes provided by one of the rebel leaders, a former technician who had memorized Voss's personal codes before escaping. Beyond lay the heart of Obsidian Mining's operation on Tartarus 7. The administrative level was eerily quiet. Too quiet. "It's a trap," Thorn realized, just as emergency barriers slammed down behind them. Director Voss's voice echoed through hidden speakers. "Captain Riker. And my wayward Cerulean asset. How thoughtful of you to deliver yourselves personally." Mira tensed beside him, her hand tightening on her weapon. "He knew we were coming." "Oh, I've been expecting you since your dramatic departure," Voss continued. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize a military-grade operation when I saw one? You've been monitored since you entered the system." Armed guards emerged from concealed positions, surrounding them with practiced efficiency. At the far end of the corridor, a door slid open to reveal Director Voss himself. The Cronian looked different than Thorn remembered. His cybernetic enhancements had been upgraded, more extensive, more lethal. His right arm had been completely replaced with a weaponized prosthetic, and the mechanical components at his temple had expanded across half his face. Your little rebellion has cost me significantly, Voss said, approaching with mechanical precision. The hegemony is displeased. Quarterly projections are down 70%. His cybernetic eye focused on Mira. All because I allowed one insignificant slave to escape. Thorn shifted subtly, positioning himself between Mira and Voss. It was never about one slave. Your entire operation is built on suffering. Voss laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Suffering is the foundation of empire, Captain. Always has been. Your species understood that once, before the Alliance softened humanity's edge. As he spoke, Thorn activated the subdermal communicator implanted at the base of his skull, a precaution Valencia had insisted upon. The signal would alert the other teams that the primary mission had been compromised. Take them to holding, Voss ordered his guards. I want them processed and shipped to the Hegemony Research Division. They're particularly interested in interspecies pairs that show signs of pair bonding. The moment the guards moved to comply, the facility's lights flickered and died, plunging the corridor into darkness. Emergency backups activated seconds later, casting everything in the same red glow as the maintenance tunnel. What is this? Voss demanded. A massive explosion shook the building, distant but powerful enough to make the floor beneath them tremble. Thorn didn't hesitate. In the momentary confusion, he drew his concealed secondary weapon, a compact neural disruptor similar to the one he'd used against Voss during their first encounter. He fired at the nearest guards while Mira, moving with extraordinary speed, disarmed another. Voss's cybernetic arm reconfigured into a plasma cannon, the weapon humming as it charged. But before he could fire, the ceiling above him exploded inward, showering the corridor with debris. Through the newly created opening dropped 3 figures, Coda and 2 rebels from the mining camps. Communications are down.